Welcome to the NoFace Show.
So then, let's talk about what you're up to right now, and maybe how you went from that decision of being an artist into deciding to not, stop being an artist and going back behind the scenes, which is where you are right now. Maybe tell us how that process went and what you're up to in the moment.
Absolutely. So yeah, the first record deal that I got fell apart because one of the members of the group, who was a producer, didn't want to share co-production credit with Max Martin,
Mm-hmm.
which is crazy to think of that now. But we didn't know, he didn't know who Max was, and he didn't want to share production credit. And Atlantic eventually dropped us due to creative differences. I stayed in the group, and we kind of continued on. And a few years later, we got signed again in 2000 to Warner Brothers. Phil Corderero signed us personally. And at that time, I was managed by Maurice Starr, the guy who had created New Edition and New Kids on the Block, and basically laid the foundation for pop music as we know it today when it comes to even groups like One Direction or, BTS, that whole image and delivery. Maurice was responsible for. And we got another deal in 2000. And then a little before our release, 9/11 happened in New York City. And so obviously the world was turned inside out, and we got dropped along with many other artists. Destiny's Child actually had an album that was supposed to come out. NSYNC had an album that was supposed to come out. And because of 9/11, those albums were never released. So we were one of the casualties at that time. And so, at that point, I said, well, this artist thing, it's hard to get the deals and then fall and then get the deal and fall. It takes a toll on you from an artist perspective. And so around 2003, I had gone solo at that time. And this thing came along in MySpace and Talent Match. And there were these websites that started to pop up, which was the beginning of what we know as social media. And I realized that there's going to be a lot of talent coming through on some of these websites. And so I started to invest into finding other talent, from producers to writers, artists, musicians. And so Talent Match was the first website I had gone on, and I started to scout for talent. And I was trying to convince the record labels at that time that, hey, there's this thing going on. I think this is going to be something big. You guys want to get on this? And of course, they dismissed it. They said, oh, it'll be over in a couple of years. It's a fad. It won't last, because they didn't know anything else. Yeah. They knew the same system that they'd been using since 1950. And then all of a sudden, this thing came along, the internet and these websites. MySpace eventually became very big. And so I was finding artists, and I ended up putting a group together on MySpace with a partner of mine. They were three girls from Livingston, New Jersey. And, I gave them the name of Candy Coated Chaos, because as you can imagine, 3 15-year-old girls from Jersey, it was a lot to keep in check and to put this group together. And I mean, they were wild. And so we came up with the name of Candy Coated Chaos, and we had done some originals, and I wound up getting them signed over at Republic with Avery and Monty Littman. Walked them in, they performed, and they gave them a deal. And I thought, this is it. We could find these artists online because they're here. And we could start to put things together and help them connect to the people that I know through my relationships. And they were the #1 pop group on MySpace at the time. And so, they eventually fell apart because it's so hard to keep groups together. There's so many different opinions and attitudes and egos. It's very hard to push a group project. Very, very hard. From being in one and creating one, it's very difficult. And you have all the different parents that are involved, and it makes it hard to get everybody on the same page. But, I started then to really push to the labels and producers and radio programmers and say, hey, look, this isn't going away. And they were still reluctant. They still thought, oh, MySpace is dying out. It's over with. Little did they know, well, here comes another thing. And, Facebook, and then Twitter, and it just kept going. And so I just stayed on it, and I continued to find artists. I had worked with Sam Smith, helped put together the record Latch with Disclosure, which became the record that blew Sam Smith up. He wanted nothing to do with it because he was a pop top 40 contemporary artist, and here's a techno track.
Exactly.
Why would I want to do that? That's not the kind of artist. And I'm thinking, well, that's the whole point. You're not that, but it's just a vehicle to get your voice out there. And so, it just continued on. And then I started to put together events and shows for artists that were online. So there were tons of these young artists that were coming up on Instagram and on Vine and on Twitter. And so I was helping to put together shows where fans of theirs could go and see them perform. No different than going to see a major artist perform. You've got 4 or 5 major artists on the ticket. We had all these upcoming kids that nobody had heard about. And I'm, Austin Mahone and Jacob Whitesides and Alessia Showhouse and Lexi Sal and all of these artists that had big followings on social media. And one of them happened to be Shawn Mendes, who I'd come across on Vine.
Vine, exactly.
And so, my goal was really at that time, I would come across an artist like Shawn, and I would send out all his links to people I knew within the industry who were very high up. David Massey and, Mike Karen and people who were further up than me. And they could actually do something with these artists. So that's really what I did. I wasn't looking for credit. I was just looking at it thinking, well, I can't help them necessarily. I don't have that pull at this point. So let me send their links to people who could help them. And so, some say, well, did you discover Shawn Mendes? And well, there were millions of other little girls that really discovered Shawn Mendes on Vine and YouTube. They knew of him way before me. But I was the one that came along and sent out his links and helped connect him to people that eventually were able to get him moving closer to his goals within the music industry. And this is, artists like Halsey as well. I had met her at a party in 2012 in Brooklyn. And it was just a matter of, hey, I know so-and-so. Maybe you should talk to this producer or that person. And things came of it. And it was really cool to see because I knew that, I was kind of connecting the dots, but people in the world never knew who I was. They didn't, I didn't have my name in lights. I was kind of just passing on the talent to people I felt could help them better than I could help them. And so that was always my goal, to where years later now I could say, oh yeah, I knew of Alessia Cara before anybody, or Shawn Mendes, or, Rex Orange County and Conan Gray and Girl in Red, because that's what I had focused my life on, was finding artists on social media. And sometimes I would contact them and say, hey, can I send your stuff out? And, I'm going to try to connect you to some producers and writers and, people in the industry. And then other times I would just send out their links and hope that, David Massey would open it up, or L.A. Reid would check into it. And sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't. But I was never putting my name on it. I was just doing it because no one ever did it for me. And I thought, well,
giving back.
Yeah, it's
filling
exactly
in the void that you saw missing, right, when you were an artist.
Exactly. Because
That's awesome.
no one cared about me when I was coming through. They all wanted to work with the superstars. And even today, when I speak to a producer, I'm like, hey, I have this really great artist. They're amazing. They're working with Dua Lipa. They're working with a superstar, and that's their goal. And of course they deserve it because they've put so much into their career to get there. But I always believe, well, who's the next Dua Lipa? Who's the next Shawn Mendes? Who's the next? And so, because there is going to be a next. And so if I could be the one to find the next, that's better than saying I'm working with the current, because I found the next one. So I always found value in that.